They sure are, and this is your big event to start your day. It's Eamon O'Neill and Diane Oxbury between 6 and 9. Heather Stott takes over at 9 o'clock. You'll be having coffee with some fascinating people this morning, so stick around for her. But before 9 o'clock, do you go to the pub and watch a bit of football?
I have been known to, yeah.
Well, if you live in Bolton and you enjoy going to the pub and watching a bit of football, you might have to think again, because the cops are after you. The media police are after you.
The media police?
We'll find out what that's about very soon.
It's just gone 8:30. Thanks for joining us. If you're lucky enough to travel around the world a bit, say you go, I don't know, let's pluck some names out of the air. Washington, Kiev, Paris.
Oh, very nice.
You're bound to take a few snaps, aren't you, along
Of course you are. You want to see the architecture, you want evidence that you've been there, you want to look at how these cities are living and breathing and vibrant.
No, you don't. What you want is a photo album full of pictures of cemeteries, gravestones and memorials. David Dunicoe, Manchester lad's got so many, he's now got his own exhibition in Salford. So, the book you've just brought in for us is Memento Mori, which means, remember you're going to die.
It does.
And we are all going to die.
Yes, but most of us are trying not to think about it, David. We're putting it off for as long as we possibly can, if you don't mind.
Well, hopefully I'm going to put it off for a few years yet, but
your photographs are fantastic.
Why are you interested in this aspect of life?
Well, I think because it will come to us all, and it's not something that's really set out to do, but it's something that's started seemingly to accumulate pictures of statues, and one of the best places to see statues is in cemeteries and graveyards.
You've got some pictures here, very elaborate ones though, haven't you?
Yeah, some of, I think in Britain we used to quite sort of reserved kind of things, especially in the Victorian era, but they started getting more and more flamboyant. But certainly if you go on the continent, particularly in France, where I went to Père Lachaise Cemetery, which is where people like Jim Morrison, Edith Piaf, Sarah Bernhardt are buried, some of the statues there are very elaborate, and you get a lot of portrait busts of the deceased there, so it's really like going to a sculpture gallery more than a cemetery.
New Orleans has some stunning statues, doesn't it, and sculptures?
I believe so. It's somewhere I've never been, though.
Oh, really?
So,
is that on your wish list?
Well, possibly, but I'm not sure I can persuade my partner to spend all our holidays around cemeteries, so perhaps.
So if you went to Weast or Southern or Moston, would you have things that are just as interesting in their own northwest way?
Yeah, particularly like Weast, which is one of the great cemeteries in Britain. I mean, actually in Weast, 6 of the memorials have got Grade 2 listed building status now. So if you go there, there's some very elaborate ones, including the first ever burial at Weast was Joseph Brotherton, who was the first MP of Salford, and ironically he was one of the driving forces behind Salford Council making their own cemetery, and he ended up being the first person buried in it. So he's got a very elaborate tomb. So Weast is one of the great cemeteries in Britain to go and visit.
We heard earlier from Southern Cemetery, our reporter Matt Trevone was then, John Rylands has an edifice that covers 21 spaces.
So I believe, yeah. I've never actually seen that.
Well, you'd have to get yourself down to Southern.
I live not far from Southern, so I think I'll be paying that a visit, yeah.
One of the things that you've done is you've made a bit of a montage, and there's a montage featuring the Angel of the North.
Yeah, well, angels, although, probably not many people actually believe in the literal existence anymore, but they're one of the common things you'll see in cemeteries, and they're not just a sort of Christian symbol. Other religions have angels as well. And although, like I say, no one probably really believes in the literal existence anymore, they still have a resonance. You still see them in a lot of artworks. There's still a lot of films which feature angels. I mean, one of my favourite films is A Matter of Life and Death with David Niven, and, the sort of angel theme in that. So angels are still sort of common, and the Angel of the North is one of the most popular public sculptures in Britain now. So one of the things I wanted to show in the exhibition was how these themes have a life of their own. So you still see angels now outside of the religious context.
Are the pictures that you tend to take of our history of how we commemorate our dead? I mean, how are we commemorating our dead, as we speak? Will some of the tombs that we choose and some of the statues that we choose actually be looked on favourably as years go by?
Possibly not. People still have the same need to commemorate the dead. they've always had. And a lot of the ways we do that were sort of formed in the Victorian era. Of course, the Victorian era is much more religious era than now, which is more secular. But a lot of the customs and things started then. But you're seeing changes. So, for instance, in the Victorian era, the funeral service was a religious rite, whereas now most people's funerals have become more memorial services where you remember the life of the person. So things are changing, but the Victorians at the time when they were doing some of their more elaborate tombs, they were considered quite vulgar by people at the time, just as perhaps some gravestones now might be considered.
It's a status
vulgar.
Symbol as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
if you've got enough money to spend or waste on a huge monument, you can see actually we live near Sale Cemetery.
Yeah.
And it's split by Marsden Road, actually, isn't it? And on one side was obviously the first one, then it's spread out across the road, so it gets more modern as you get through the cemetery. But as you're going from Washway Road, on the left-hand side, which is the old bit, some of the monuments are huge. And not necessarily to big, very wealthy, well-known MPs, for example. They're just people who have obviously spent a lot of money on a family tomb. And yet, if you turned right and went into the current modern-day plots, they're a lot more subdued and subtle and in some ways more respectful, less gaudy.
Yeah, I think certainly with modern tombs, a lot of it is down to the expense, because the cost of erecting those kind of massive stone monuments would be absolutely enormous now. And in the past, labour was a lot cheaper. But yeah, I mean, you're quite right that these tombs were status symbols. And Ronnie Scott, who wrote a book about the necropolis in Glasgow, which is, a fabulous cemetery to visit, he sort of said that, these tombs and things were done for the living, not for the dead, that were done to show the status of the person. And of course, sometimes you get very elaborate tombs because it's a way of people showing how deep their grief is. So today, instead of a very elaborate tomb, what you might see is a lot of ornament on the tomb. You'll see lots of, like, say, dolls and toys put on tombs, for instance. So it's doing the same thing, but in a different way.
In terms of craftsmanship, one of the photographs that you've got is of a young boy. It says in the brochure that I'm looking at now, you know nothing about this young lad. He's from it was a cemetery in Manchester. A young boy named Terence. You think he may have died in the 1950s. And it's a bust of a young boy. And it's just the work that's gone into that, the craftsmanship. It is a beautiful piece, isn't it?
Yeah, that was very unusual. That was actually the first photograph I took in this series, and I think it was what got me interested in some of them, because it's very unusual in Britain to see that kind of thing, a portrait of the deceased. You've perhaps seen it more now, because now you'll see photographs on graves, which at one time you never did, other than perhaps in Eastern Europe that was common, but it was very uncommon. But the bust of the young boy was very strange and unusual. I believe it was actually stolen.
What a terrible shame, because it's an unusual expression, but that is so full of life.
Yeah.
The expression on that boy's face and the artistry that's gone into that, it's wonderful.
Yeah, like I say, that was very unusual, and that was, I think, what started me off on this.
It's also captured the essence of the 50s, actually.
Yes, you're absolutely right. He looks like a young lad trying out for a football team. He's just got his cowlick slicked down, and he's just got that 1950s face. It's wonderful.
So it's the tombstones, the monuments and so on, but do any epitaphs or phrases jump out at you when you take any photographs? Yeah,
sometimes. I mean, some of the inscriptions, and it tends not to be sort of the poems and things. It tends to be the very simple ones, particularly if you go to Weast, which is celebrating its 150th anniversary this year. Of course, you're covering the early and mid-Victorian period, and in Salford at that time, male life expectancy in some parts of Salford was 17 years. So some of the graves, are infants. And so on. So some of those are quite moving, and you do get some humorous ones. I mean, one of the ones I sort of liked, which I saw, was "Here lies an atheist, all dressed up and no place to go." So I think I'd probably have that as mine.
Well, it's fascinating. Your photographs are fascinating. They're at Salford Art Gallery, aren't they?
They are, yeah. until January.
Great, well done. And we highly recommend you go and see David Dunico's photographs of tombstones and gravestones and graveyards from around the world, not least right on the doorstep here. Salford Art Gallery until January. Thanks, David.
Right, thank you very much.
Just gone 20 to 9.
BBC Radio Manchester. News Update.